Hello, I'm Brandy Agerbeck of LooseTooth.com. So excited to share with you a brand new resource in partnership with Neuland, and it is the Neuland Color Wheel and how to store your markers poster. So here on one side of the poster, we have a giant, gorgeous color wheel, and on the second side of the poster, we have got how to store every kind of Neuland marker. So I want to talk a tiny bit about how this poster came into being. I had the very good pleasure of teaching a couple in-person workshops at Neuland headquarters in partnership with Vocablo Academy. And during one of the workshops, somebody asked, does Neuland have a color wheel? And I thought that's such a good question. So at one point in the workshop, the people in the workshop were all working at the board, focused individually, doing their visual thinking. Fantastic work. And it gave me a chance to sneak away, walk up to Guido at Neuland's office and said, Guido, do you have a color wheel? And instantly, this is one of my absolute favorite parts of Guido, of many, which is you can instantly see when the wheels are turning. And he's like, no, we don't. And we, at that moment, we started to design a color wheel of this gorgeous collection of colors you can get for almost all of their markers. I have to qualify that because this is for all the water-based markers. They have dry erase markers, they have permanent markers, they have sketch note or sketch one markers for smaller scale, but for every water-based marker, you have these beautiful options. And happily, sometime after that, I got a draft color wheel from them, and I said, okay, this is a fantastic start, but let me put my art theory nerdness on this to make sure we had a beautiful and accurate color wheel for you to use. So let me share a couple components of this poster. The first thing is on the outside fold, here you can see we have got all of the colors ranked from the very lightest, lowest contrast against a white piece of paper to the highest contrast, the blackest black, and you can see everything in between. So this is really fantastic guide to figure out how low contrast or high contrast a color is, how light or dark a color is in relationship to the white of the page and in relationship to each other. Like I said, one side of the poster is about how to store your markers, and Neuland has a beautiful selection, a beautiful variety in nib shape, in nib size, and which is going to give you different types of lines to use for different kinds of applications. Certainly we're going to focus today on a lot of the water-based markers that are ink. They also have markers that are paint, and they have metallics down there, not sure if it's in frame or not, but each type of marker is going to be best suited for a certain type of storage. Generally, the kind of inks we're going to talk about today, all the water-based inks, you want to store with their nibs pointing down because gravity is working in your favor, and you can make sure you have a nice juicy nib to draw with. On the flip side, we want to use the nib side up for any of the paint and chalk markers because you don't want the paint, in this case ink here, transparent. Here we've got opaque paints. You don't want the paint to dry up in the marker nib, to get stuck and kind of clog up the marker nib. So you want those to be pointing up so that they can the paint can drain from the nib, longer life for those beautiful markers. And the metallic markers down there, you want to store horizontally. You just kind of want that ink to hang out in the felt collector in the center, the reservoir in the center, and not be up or down, but sideways. Before I get into the beautiful benefit of color range, I want to talk about two other key benefits that make me love Neuland markers. One is that the materials they use, the components of the inks and the paints, are non-toxic. Even their alcohol-based markers are low odor. And I want to make sure whatever materials you're using, hopefully they're Neuland's, that you're using ingredients that are safe. Because even if you don't feel anything now, remember that when you're drawing, that alcohol, those ingredients, whatever that ink or paint is made of, is never any farther than arm's length from that beautiful nose that beautiful brain, and those beautiful lungs. So I want to make sure you're getting safe, healthy materials to work with. The second giant benefit of Neuland markers is that they are refillable. So here we have an empty marker, which we call in our household the ghost marker, that you could fill with any color you want, or you could mix colors, but all of the pre-filled markers are refillable. I think almost all of them. They're working towards everything being refillable, but what you do is you have a pre-filled marker or an empty marker, you have a bottle of ink, and you can refill the marker again and again and again and again. And not only are they refillable, they are re-nibbable. So this is the #1 size marker, a classic chisel tip marker. And not only can I refill it from the beautiful, bold, bright colors and also be able to mix my own colors, I can change out that nib when it gets too fuzzy. Get the contrast of the black wall behind me. When it gets too fuzzy. So that's why each one of these markers is a super fantastic investment, because it is super duper reusable. I've been using the Neuland markers since 2008, and in all that time, I've only had to replace one marker because of user error, and I overfilled it. But it's not hard to refill these markers, so don't let my one overfilled marker scare you off to absolutely beautiful tools and sustainable tools, not only for your own personal health, but certainly for the environment. But we are here to talk about the third big beautiful benefit, which is this beautiful range of colors. And I want to walk you through this color wheel, what it means and how you can use it to choose the right markers for your project. It's likely you haven't seen a color wheel since elementary school, and maybe learned all about this once. So I'd love to refresh your memory or introduce you to how colors fit together, how to use them best in combination. The first thing I want you to think about is imagine a rainbow, or think about a prism refracting light into the spectrum. So, you see that beautiful spectrum of visible light, and it goes from red to orange to yellow to green to blue to purple to indigo, if you learned Roy G. Biv, all those gorgeous, gorgeous colors. And what we want to do is take that spectrum of light, that bandwidth of all those different frequencies of color, not going to get more physicsy on you than that, and just imagine that you're taking that spectrum and you're turning it into a circle. That ring of color lives here at this level of the poster. So you can see here we have an unbroken circle of color. It's just so darn gorgeous. And this is our baseline color wheel. Now I'm gonna tell you about this part and this part soon, but I want you to notice there's a little more space here and a little more space here to really help you focus on hue. Hue is the first characteristic of color, and it is what frequency is that light emanating from and bouncing off of things, and we perceive them as one hue is different than another hue, that red is different than orange, is different than teal, or ocean in this case, that's the frequency that color lives on. And that I like to think of that as pure saturated color. The next characteristic of color is value, and value is all about how light or how dark is that color in relationship to our baseline hue. We're going to borrow from painting to think about value. So think about your base color is red, and if you think about the lighter values of that color, which we call tints, imagine that as adding white to that color. So a little bit of white, more white, to create those different tints of the hue that is red. You can also think about adding black to make that color darker. In this case, adding a little bit of black to get a darker red or a scarlet color, and that is what we call a shade. So tints get lighter, shades get darker, and as an aside, the third type of value you can get is if you were to add white and black, in other words, adding gray to a color, and that's when you get a more muted color, and that is called a tone. Personally, I am the biggest fan of these gorgeous, bold, saturated colors in these markers, but if you wanted to create more muted tones, you could think about adding and mixing your own color of inks, adding just little bits of gray to create that more muted tone. Now, those are the art school terms. You are not going to get quizzed on this, but it's just kind of good context to understand what we call or how we think about a hue, the characteristic of a specific color, the bandwidth of color, and its related tints and shades, the different values, if it's lighter or darker, versions of that gorgeous 200 red color. In our poster of the Neuland inks, you can see a few different labels. One is, in each of these sections, you get the number that corresponds to that color. You can also see here, it's a little subtle because it's low contrast in the poster, it may not pick up in the video, but there's a line here that explains what I just said, which is this ring is about the shades of a color, this ring is the pure hue of a color, and all these rings out here are the different tints of that color. So you got those different parts labeled. You also have them down here when it comes to the neutral colors of grays and browns. And on the very outside ring here, we have in both German and English the names of the colors. Very simply, red, red, orange, 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 yellow, yellow, etc., etc. And lastly, just a few of these colors, our 704, our 405, and our 504 have the letter N behind the number because those are the neon colors. We set apart the grays and the browns down here because they don't really fit in a true color wheel. Gray colors are the complete desaturation of hue. So you don't have any of these guys in there, you simply have shades of gray from lightest to darkest. And browns are created by mixing several different colors together. That's why you don't see it on that pure spectrum of light. So our neutrals live down here, but I want to focus on the gorgeous bright hues that we have up here in the wheel itself. If you're watching this and you're breaking out into a sweat thinking, I'm going to get quizzed on this, why do I need to know this? How does this affect my work in using these markers? I just want to give you some very, very basic ways of thinking about color combinations. First, a very reliable color scheme you can use is one that's monochromatic, meaning you're choosing a single hue. So you would choose one specific slice of this gorgeous 12-slice pie and only work with colors within that hue. I'm borrowing examples from my video talking about the trio, my mini workshop for Neuland at UViz. You can find a link for that video too, but here we're using trios of colors to demonstrate different color combinations, and this one right here is a monochromatic example using the hue of green. So I'm using the 401 lighter green and the 400 darker green, and in my particular trios, my third color is 100 black for the highest contrast. But you can see here, this is a very cohesive color scheme because it's all within the same hue. Again, this first combination is focusing on one specific slice, one specific hue in the wheel and expanding on the shades and the tints of that color. Our next combination is looking at colors that neighbor each other. We call this analogous. So think about this as very easy for this color to reach over to this color and reach over to this color. These are colors that feel very harmonious together because they are that very natural progression on a spectrum from one part of the spectrum over to another, or one part of the spectrum over this way. Here is a color scheme using the analogous colors of orange and red. Now you can see that it's still very harmonious. These colors go together, but there's a little bit more variety than we had in that monochromatic color scheme. A third type of color combination we can use this wheel for is to find the complementary color combinations. Now this is complementary with an E, not an I, but it's a little bit of an odd term because what we're doing is we're looking for what is opposite a color on the color wheel. So here, if we're going to start with orange and we're looking for the orange color's complement, we're going to go exactly opposite to these gorgeous blue colors. You can see that this type of color combination can be very bright and dynamic from that contrast of one side of the wheel to the other. There's a lot of different ways to create color combinations. For some people, it's a more internal and intuitive and personal process. They just kind of know what goes together. For other folks, they take a more external lens and they're looking at what are some cues from the project or the client or the content that helps inform the colors that they pick. And it can be a combination of the two. But here in this poster, we have the opportunity to do 5 things very quickly, very easily. The first thing is very simply seeing the beautiful range of colors that we have in Neuland inks. Second, we can look at the contrast between the ink we're using and the paper we're drawing on. So here we've got the lowest contrast colors to the highest contrast colors, all in relationship to each other. Third, we can focus on one specific slice of the wheel to help us create a monochromatic color scheme. Fourth, we can look at what hues neighbor each other to create an analogous color scheme where you have a little bit more variety in hue, but it still reads as very put together and harmonious. And finally, our fifth quick at a glance thing we can do with this poster right here is that we can look at what colors are opposite each other, which is called a complementary color scheme. And these guys are much more contrasty and vibrant and dynamic. And that is our quick introduction to the Neuland Ink color wheel. I was very proud to help them develop this resource for all of us. And don't worry again, you're not going to get quizzed on the specific art school terms, but I definitely hope this has helped you look at how colors relate to each other within this model of a wheel. And now we have a handy dandy foldable color wheel that you can tuck into your work kit or hang a copy on your wall or use it to help teach others how to pick the best colors for their project. Because I want you to use color a lot versus using a lot of colors. I adore that Neuland has this beautiful range of colors, but within a project I'm being very selective so I can truly make meaning from every color I choose. And I'm thinking about how does it relate within a hue, with hues neighboring each other, or hues opposite each other to help me make more meaningful drawings with this beautiful tool that we have of color.